Hello, my name is Niall McKay and welcome to Living with PSC, a podcast about the rare disease of primary sclerosing cholangitis. Now, PSC causes the bile ducts inside and outside the liver to become scarred, narrowed and eventually blocked, and leads to liver cirrhosis. In this podcast, we aim to dispel some of the myths about the disease. Today, we're speaking to John Crowley, who is a living donor transplant recipient. John, do you want to just give us a little bit about your history with PSC and we can take it from there?
Yeah, sure. My adventure down this road started. I had colitis in 1983, which I was able to get a hold on through diet and exercise. And then, unfortunately, I was diagnosed with PSC in October of 2003. Luckily, the doctor that was on call when I went to the emergency room, suffering a cholangitis attack, was a hepatologist and actually identified the disease that night through an ERCP, and the rest, as they say, is magic.
When you were approaching your transplant, what were the symptoms that kind of brought you there?
Well, for me, I had continued working, and I had kept plugging through it. But for me, the excessive tiredness, I was starting to turn jaundice, itchy. I was just itchy all over all the time, and I couldn't gain any weight. I was starting to look, sullen, and then the straw that finally broke the camel's back. I was out in Marfa working, and I started having eternal bleeding because of the veins coming into the liver just got so strictured that they dripped. They just tore apart. So I was dumping blood into my stomach, and that's kind of, we had the conversation. Luckily, I come from a really big family with plenty of livers in it. And so we had kind of started the conversation in the process. And, but that was kind of when the decision was like, we need to really get this scheduled and on the table. So it really helped that I had a living donor in order to pluck that 60% from.
And were you not on a list anyway?
Well, I had been on a list, or I had gotten close to getting on the list earlier because of my colitis had started to act up, and they put me on Remicade, which, is a chemotherapy drug, which actually started to attack my liver. So that was the only time I had, elevated numbers because, as a lot of people know, that the mill score in PSC patients is always very low. So I was on a definite course for never getting a cadaverous liver. So once again, that's why I was fortunate to come from a big family and had a brother that was willing to jump aboard with us. So
I know. I think you're probably more likely to get a liver transplant if you have alcoholic liver disease than PSC.
which is very sad, and it's one of those things that, at Christmas, I really didn't like coming from a large family, but, yeah, so I had my brother, 1 year older than me. He's about the same body size, same blood type. And, he's a self-employed writer and has no kids. He knew that I wasn't going to make it.
I talked to a transplant surgeon yesterday, and one of the things that they were saying was that the problem is that people who are on the cadaverous list, so waiting for a liver from somebody who's died, is basically that timing, and the waiting for it, and particularly for PSC patients, waiting for it means that you get other complications, which affect your outcome.
Yes. And it's, when you get a living donor, you're basically there on the same day, and within probably 2 hours, depending on how much, what my doctor referred to as back table work, that organ is placed inside you within that, less than an hour window. So it's actually, in a very, very healthy state when they drop it into the hole they've created and, plug all the tubing back in. So I hate to talk about it like it's working on a F-150 or something, but it's basically like that to the surgeons. The fresher the organ, the better success they have of reconnecting it and, getting on.
It seems to be that they, take a lobule out of a right or a left side of, the donor liver, and they sort of connect that tree up to the tree in your body. Surgically, while a complicated surgery, it's not hard to understand.
Well, and the extraordinary thing so my family, originally was from Ireland at some point. So my brother and I were Irish twins. We were, almost a year apart. So I believe that he got the better organ than I did, because when they cut him open, which is the procedure, they take the donor first, and they look at, the mechanics of their liver. And when they got inside of his, he had an additional blood vessel on each side of the lobe, which made his liver super healthy because he had so much blood pumping through it. And they said if they would have known, they would have tried to ask him to donate another 20%. So when I got his liver into my body, it took an additional amount of time to figure out how to join those two additional blood vessels in the 60%, in the 60% I got. So it did take a lot longer to figure out the conduit to get all those blood vessels stuffed into it to hook it up to me. So, it's one of those things. He just had a super liver and I did not.
One of the things, though, speaking to other people, is that genetically, um, whether it's a combination of genetics and environmental factors, and possibly even, things like, an antibiotic that was prescribed for you, 20 years ago and wasn't prescribed for your brother.
Right. Right. It's hard. It's really hard to tell, because we all know when no one really knows why we luck out and get PSC. So it is strange, but I do come from a family that has some autoimmune diseases. Like my brother has asthma. I have two brothers with asthma. I have a sister with arthritis and rheumatoid arthritis, and so there is some. It is in our genes somewhere that there's an autoimmune, mishap going on somewhere. So
yeah, they think there's a kind of a combination of of a genetic factor and then possibly an environmental factor.
right, right.
How is your health now?
Well, as the surgeon said, when you have if you have a party at your house, there's something that's going to get broken. It's inevitable. Wine's going to spill on the floor, or a lampshade's going to get busted. So directly after surgery, everything was fine. I felt great, started to work out again, was walking every day, everything was, I'm, like I said, super lucky and had an excellent experience. And then about a year after, maybe a little less than a year after, I started getting this reoccurring infection. And they assumed that it wasn't the liver. The liver was functioning. It was the tubing. It was the surgical stress, I guess, from having such there's a lot of stuff going on in there. The liver is inverted. Like I said, they had to do conduits and different piping. So they felt that there was a bend in one of the veins coming out. So I was put on a PICC line with an antibiotic, and that was a 6-week treatment, and I've been fine ever since. There is an occasional fever that I get, but an antibiotic clears it up within a day. So they're thinking there may be some surgical kink in the line somewhere. But as far as the liver goes itself, it's functioning like a normal liver should.
So you're back, you're able to work out and do all the things that you were able to do before you were ill?
Yeah, my honey-do list was really, really large, by the point that there's no excuses anymore. So I've always had a really strict diet, and I've always really, tried to exercise every day. And now it's a matter of, actually gaining that muscle tone back, which is really surprising because I've already come up almost a pant size. And, I'm at about 200 pounds now, which was up from 160. So there's definitely something's going on right in my body. Like I'm absorbing nutrients, I'm absorbing, muscle mass, I'm absorbing, so much more than I was able to do prior to transplant. So, as far as everyone's telling me, everything is working really, really well. And so, if it's a small infection every now and then, I can handle it.
Well, you'd certainly know, wouldn't you? I mean, you know what the disease is like when it's at its worst.
Well, it's actually this past weekend, out of nowhere, Saturday night, I was freezing cold and then I was boiling hot. And then I woke up Sunday morning and had the same old PSC that we've all come to know and love. The cold sweats, the exhaustion, just the not wanting to do anything. And then I took my antibiotic and by Monday I was back at work. So, um, yeah, I mean, it's great that it's now, you know exactly what it is and you know exactly how to treat it or treat the symptoms for it.
Let's talk a little bit about that. Let's talk about the symptoms because I think it takes people a long time to realize what the symptoms are.
For me, um, I could start to tell I was having a cholangitis attack from a lower back pain, like an immense lower back pain that would just kind of rise through my back all the way up to my neck, shoulders, and then head. My itching would increase, which was a constant with me. I had a really bad itching to the point where my ankles and feet were scarred from just having to take care of it, which, as PSC people know, it's kind of impossible. So mine would start that way. Then I would start to get a fever. I run cold. My temperature, runs cold, and I would start to get a fever, in the hundreds, and then, the pure exhaustion, and I would just have no energy. It was like the life just got sucked out of me, and I couldn't move, or it hurt to move, or it was just really, really painful. Um, and then that would go on until I started, a round of antibiotics. But, for me at the time I was working because I was so worried about my health insurance, and I received health insurance through work that I would, work. And then if I got tired or whatever, I would just pull over on the side of the road and take like a 30-minute nap or, whatever I could do to make it through the day. So it was a long struggle for me just to deal with it and try to keep my spirits up and not get depressed and not yell at the kids and just, try to just maintain some sort of life, while dealing with it. So it does take a physical impact on your body. But for me, the whole time, I never went and saw another doctor. The only doctor I saw was my gastroenterologist and hepatologist because I am truly convinced that everything that was going on with me was liver related, and I still do to this day. so, anything that happens to me, I'm like, oh, something's happened with the liver. Gotta call the hepatologist. So, it's just being aware of this disease takes over almost everything in your body. It's like the evil, the evil grand master, the puppet master of your body.
And you talked about managing the disease through diet. Would you like to talk a little bit about that? Like, do you have a vegetarian diet? Do you go to fast food restaurants?
For me, my diet change came from having colitis for all these years. I came from a family of, meat and potatoes and, a lot of butter and, just really thick, unhealthy food to an extent. And I changed my diet to vegan to deal with my colitis, which really helped. No dairy. I had to start introducing eggs and fish and things of that sort because I was starting to lose so much weight and wasn't able to keep any protein in my system. So I still live by that today. I never eat any fast food. I don't drink sodas. I keep a low sugar diet. I do drink coffee, which there's some research that it's good for your liver. but I keep pretty much vegetarian, as much as possible, and just no really fatty foods because I can really tell when I do if I go off the deep end.
Going back to the live organ donor transplant issue, what is it that you need for that? Is it just a blood type?
It's a couple things. It's blood type, and it's of course a willing candidate. That's number one. But it's blood type and then size, because the hole that they're pulling, they in my case, they pull the entire liver out, which for me, when I got transplanted, my liver was at 5 pounds and some change. So it was really, really swollen. And my brother's anatomy and we're about the same size. I'm a little taller than he is, and I have a longer torso. So the liver, whatever the 60% they did take of his fit right in there. So that's a really important issue size wise.
And do you have to take immunosuppressants now?
I do. I've been on a drug. It's called Prograf, which they've just lowered, which is a good sign. And then I'm on another drug called Myforic, which I'll be on those supposedly for the rest of my life.
And do they have side effects?
The Prograf can, from what I understand, they want to get you off of it because it can kind of attack the kidneys a bit. So they'll wean you completely off of Prograf, and you'll be on Myforic, I think, as your drug is what I understand is the protocol that they try to use. Like I'm still on some prednisone right now, but they're trying to wean off of that. But those are the main drugs they give you to, after surgery and to keep you functioning, without catching anything.
And you don't take Urso or any of those drugs anymore?
I do. I take Urso. I take that 3 times a day, and then I take a drug for my ulcerative colitis, which I take that once a day.
And what does the Urso help with?
The Urso, I believe, breaks down bile. I've been on it for a while now, so I continue to take it as directed. And luckily, I owe 90% of my success to my wife, Monica, who, was at every doctor's appointment, every scan, every emergency room run, and is twice as smart as me on any given day, was able to just, talk to the doctor on the doctor's level.
So is your, brother living in your basement now, smoking weed every day or anything like that? Sort of saying, "Oh,
No,
you."
he went back to work, and they cut him loose in 2 weeks. And they said, call us if you throw up, and that was about the only direction they gave him. And he went up. We just had our 2-year checkup. So I had my transplant on October 14th, 2000, I guess 2 years ago. So he came up, and they took a look at him, and they walked it, because the nice thing about being a donor is that you're treated so well. Like, you're, in the eyes of everyone, you're just like a hero. And so they take really good care of their, the people that are willing to go through the pain and suffering of donating an organ. So, they hold them in very high regard. So, but he, it is funny now. It's like, if he needs a ride, I'm like there, anything he needs from me, I'm jumping in, head first, because it's because of him I can.
Yeah, well, it is. These people are the heroes, really. And talking a little bit about that, was there any? Can you talk about his journey with it?
Well, he had never been sick before, so he was a terrible patient. And anybody that's had PSC, I mean, we could pretty much hook ourselves up to, we could draw our own blood at this point, or we could, we're used to dealing with nurses that are, wearing uncomfortable shoes and angry all the time. We're used to that kind of environment. Whereas you throw someone in there that's totally healthy and has never been in a hospital, more for a physical once a year. I think it was hard on him in that way, being kind of trapped and contained and having to deal with what, is like a PSC person's social hour. It's like, that's where our friends are. And, for him, that was, I think, the hardest part of it. But, of course he had a huge abdominal scar and, which is healed, and he's kind of back to normal. So, but it is an interesting thing to do for somebody. Like it's a heroic thing to do, to sign up to do that, because my biggest concern about even asking him was, what if he gets injured, or what if he gets sick from this? That was my biggest stress of even having somebody do that for me.
Do they do ultrasounds and stuff on him to make sure that he's okay?
Not anymore. I mean, they basically just were like, well, if anything weird goes on, call us and we'll take care of it.
You're an inspiration to all of us, John. So thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us. Is there anything you kind of want to add that we didn't talk about?
I would just, anybody that's kind of going through this or is on that long road to transplant, I would just, no matter what or how bad you feel, just keep moving. Just, you have to do that, because as sick as you feel, or as sick as I felt, or I always just kept myself moving, because the healthier you are going into a surgery like that, the better the outcome. And it's also better for your brain, and it's also better just to keep like focused on the objective. I didn't know anybody. Like, I thought I was this rare thing out there in the world, going through this on our own. And then we found PSC Partners, and it was awesome, man. It was like finally somebody else could kind of understand what you were going through, and you had people to talk to about it, and like just the doctors they were pulling, and it was just such an informative and just a great place to go. And
well, John, thank you very much for your time.
I hate to quote that ridiculous Saving Private Ryan, when he says "earn this." It's such a cheesy thing, but it is something that I gotta do something good, or it's just, what's the point?
Well, I'm afraid that's all the time we have for this week. For more information about PSC and for a list of people and topics we'll be covering in the near future, please go to www.pscpartners.org. That's www.pscpartners.org. PSC Partners is a non-profit organisation dedicated to providing education and support to primary sclerosing cholangitis patients. There is information and resources on the website. There is a conference once a year. There is a private Facebook group that you can also join. Also, please join our patient registry. This is an anonymous database that provides research support to the medical community who are researching this disease. Thank you very much for listening.